Cujo was the gentlest, most beautiful man I've ever known. He taught me the truth as he learned it from the beautiful brothers in California's concentration camps. We loved each other so much, and his love for the people was so deep that he was willing to...
Welcome to Dying is Easy, the show that revels in the world of extreme human behaviour. I am your host, Bam Barrow, and today for this very first episode of the show, we're going to delve into the strange psychological phenomenon commonly known as Stockholm Syndrome, as well as delving into some of the more famous examples of the condition. Stockholm Syndrome is a condition that causes hostages to develop psychological alliance with their captors as a survival strategy during captivity. These feelings result from a bond formed between captor and captives during intimate time spent together and are generally considered irrational in light of the danger or risk endured by the victims. Generally speaking, Stockholm Syndrome consists of strong emotional ties that develop between two persons, where one person intermittently harasses, beats, threatens, abuses, or intimidates the other. The FBI's hostage barricade database system shows that roughly 8% of victims show evidence of Stockholm Syndrome. It was formally named in 1973 when 4 hostages were taken during a bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden. The hostages defended their captors after being released and would not agree to testify in court against them. Stockholm Syndrome is ostensibly paradoxical because the sympathetic sentiments captives feel towards their captors are the opposite of fear and disdain an onlooker may feel towards the captors. There are 4 key components that generally lead to the development of Stockholm Syndrome. A hostage's development of positive feelings towards their captor. No previous hostage-captor relationship. A refusal by hostages to cooperate with police forces and other government authorities. A hostage's belief in the humanity of their captor for the reason that when a victim holds the same values as the aggressor, they cease to be perceived as a threat. From a psychoanalytic lens, it can be argued that Stockholm Syndrome arises strictly as a result of survival instincts. The victim's need to survive is stronger than his or her impulse to hate the person who has created the dilemma. A positive emotional bond between captor and captive is a defense mechanism of the ego under stress. These sentimental feelings are not strictly for show, however. Since captives often fear that their affection will be perceived as fake, they will eventually begin to believe that their positive sentiments are genuine. Stockholm Syndrome is considered a contested illness due to many law enforcement officers' doubt about the legitimacy of the condition even today. Stockholm Syndrome is not merely a condition that developed in victims of kidnappings or hostage instances. It can also be applied to a wider variety of situations afflicting victims of domestic or child abuse, human trafficking, and incest. Prisoners of war, political terrorism, cult members, concentration camp prisoners, slaves and prostitutes can also fall prey to Stockholm Syndrome, which is something I'd never really thought of before, which bears noting. When you watch interviews with victims of abuse, trauma, cult mentality, even religious extremism and severe denial in some cases, many people exhibit a 1,000-yard stare-like quality, a sort of washed-out, not present look as if they're lost in something off in the distance. Many serial killers will present the same look when recalling their past crimes. It's believed that women are especially subject to develop the condition. Typically, Stockholm Syndrome develops in captives when they engage in face-to-face contact with their captors, as well as when captors make captives doubt the likelihood of their survival by aggressively terrorizing them into helpless, powerless, and submissive states. This enables captors to appear to be nice people when the captors perform acts of kindness on or fail to beat, abuse, or rape the victims. Evolutionarily speaking, research evidence exists to support the genuine scientific nature of Stockholm Syndrome. Responses similar to those in human captives have been detected in some reptiles and mammals, primates in particular. Ideas like dominance, hierarchies, and submission strategies assist in devising explanations for the illogical reasoning behind the symptoms of those suffering from Stockholm Syndrome as a result of an oppressive relationship of any kind. As of 2013, Stockholm Syndrome has not yet been recognized by the DSM-5, the classification system for psychological disorders such as schizophrenia, bipolar, autism, etc., by the American Psychiatric Association. So we'll start with a look into probably the most famous case concerning Stockholm Syndrome, that of Patty Hearst. Patty Hearst is an American author and actress, having appeared in many films by director John Waters such as Cry Baby, Serial Mom, Pecker, A Dirty Shame and Cecil B. Demented. Before this, however, she was the subject of one of the weirdest kidnapping cases America had ever seen. Around 9 o'clock in the evening of February 4th, 1974, there was a knock on the door of apartment number 4 at 2603 Benvenue Street in Berkeley, California. In burst a group of men and women with their guns drawn. They grabbed a surprised 19-year-old college student named Patty Hearst, beat up her fiancée, threw her in the trunk of their car and drove off. Thus began one of the strangest cases in FBI history. Hearst, it was soon discovered, had been kidnapped by a group of armed radicals that billed themselves as the Symbionese Liberation Army, or SLA, led by a hardened criminal named Donald DeFreeze. The SLA wanted nothing less than to incite a guerrilla war against the US government and destroy what they called the capitalist state. Their ranks included women and men, blacks and whites, and anarchists and extremists from various walks in life. So why Hearst? To get the country's attention, primarily. Hearst was from a wealthy, powerful family. Her grandfather was the newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst. The SLA's plan worked, and worked well. The kidnapping stunned the country and made front-page national news. But the SLA had more plans for Patty Hearst. After Patty's disappearance, the SLA kept her blindfolded for the next 2 months at the group's headquarters. They also sent millions of dollars in food donations in exchange for her release. While Patty's father initially gave in to these demands, his efforts soon backfired as the SLA refused to release their hold over Patty. At the same time, they apparently began abusing and brainwashing their captive, hoping to turn this young heiress from the highest reaches of society into a poster child for their coming revolution. Patty was abused both physically and psychologically, and later claimed that she was isolated to the point she felt no one would rescue her, and that she was sexually abused by various gang members. Additionally, Patty claimed that she was constantly exposed to the group's radical beliefs and was forced to record messages that would hurt her loved ones. That too seemed to work. On April 3rd, the SLA released a tape with Hearst saying that she joined their fight to free the oppressed and had even taken a new name. A dozen days later, she was spotted on bank surveillance cameras wielding an assault weapon during an SLA bank robbery, barking orders to bystanders and providing cover to her confederates. Assault rifle in hand, Hearst joined DeFreeze in robbing a San Francisco bank on April 15, 1974. It was her first crime as a professional SLA member. They were, in short, a band of domestic terrorists, and dangerous ones. They'd already shot 2 Oakland school officials with cyanide-tipped bullets, killing one and seriously wounding the other. Despite Patty's insistence that she was not brainwashed and that she was making the choice to support the SLA out of her own free will, many people close to Patty, as well as those following her case, remained unconvinced, as Patty's behaviour was radically different from how she was before the kidnapping. Some theorised that she fell in love with one of the group's members, named Cujo, whom she mentioned in one of the release videos, while others theorised that she joined the SLA mission out of fear, sympathy, or brainwashing. Meanwhile, the FBI launched one of the most massive agent-intensive searches in its history to find Hearst and stop the SLA. Working with many partners, they ran down thousands of leads, but with the SLA frightening potential informants into silence, using good operational security and relying on organised network of safe houses, it was tough going. A break came in Los Angeles on May 16th. 2 SLA members tried to steal an ammunition belt from a local store and were nearly caught. The getaway van was discovered, which led authorities to an SLA safe house. The next day, the house was surrounded by LA police. A massive shootout ensued. The building went up in flames. 6 members of the SLA died in the blaze, including DeFreeze. But where was Hearst? She and several others had escaped and began travelling around the country to avoid capture. FBI agents, though, were close behind. They finally captured her in San Francisco on September 8, 1975, and she was charged with bank robbery and other crimes. Her trial was as sensational as the chase. Hurst's trial was a long and convoluted process, as was the search following her kidnapping. Although F. Lee Bailey, a highly renowned attorney known for having defended Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler, and Sam Shepard, also O.J. Simpson, he represented Patty, and she was ultimately found guilty by the jury and sentenced to 7 years in prison. The jury at the time did not find the theory that she was brainwashed by the SLA plausible, although today Patty Hearst's case is regarded by many as a clear example of Stockholm Syndrome. After serving 2 years in prison, however, President Carter commuted Patty's sentence, which was later pardoned by President Bill Clinton as one of his final acts in office. Upon Hearst's release from prison, she went on to become an actress starring in many John Waters films, blah blah blah, and she married her former bodyguard Bernard Shaw, with whom she now has 2 children. And the rest of the SLA? The FBI caught up with them all. The last 2 members were arrested in 1999 and 2002. Then we'll move on to the kidnapping of Colleen Stan. On May 19th, 1977, Colleen Stan was hitchhiking from her home in Eugene, Oregon to a friend's home in Northern California, where she was heading to attend a birthday party. Cameron Hooker kidnapped the then 20-year-old Stan after picking her up. Stan stated she was an experienced hitchhiker and had allowed 2 rides to go past before accepting the ride with Hooker. She reportedly felt confident climbing into the blue van because Hooker's wife Janice and their baby were in the car. When they stopped at a gas station along the way, Stan went to use the restroom. "A voice told me to run and jump out the window and never look back," she recalled. But she calmed her fears and went back to the car. According to Stan and Janice Hooker's testimonies, once they were alone in an isolated area, Hooker pulled off the highway and put a knife to Stan's throat. She was subsequently locked in a wooden head box which was designed to prevent light, sound and fresh air from entering. Before this, Cameron and Janice had reached an agreement that he would capture a slave to take Janice's place, because up until that time Cameron had been using Janice to act out sexual bondage. There was to be no penetrative sex with Stan according to the agreement, but this later changed. On the first night of her kidnapping, Stan was strung up by the hands and physically attacked by Cameron, being left blindfolded and suspended while the pair had sex below her. After her kidnapping, Stan stated that she was tortured and kept locked in a box 23 hours a day until she was given a contract and forced to sign herself into slavery for life in January 1978. She further stated that Cameron led her to believe that she was being watched by a large, powerful organization called The Company, which would painfully torture her and harm her family if she tried to escape. Stan subsequently became a slave, referred to as K, not the name K, but the letter. Forced to call Cameron master and was not allowed to talk without permission. Cameron reportedly wanted Stan to be like the female character in the 1954 French erotic novel Story of O, and soon started raping her, which consisted of oral rape. Cameron did not want to have vaginal sex with Stan because he considered that to be a breach in his agreement with his wife. Instead, he raped her vaginally and anally with implements. Following this, the Hooker family moved to a mobile home in Red Bluff with Stan, where she was kept locked in a wooden box under the couple's waterbed. In 1978, Janice gave birth to a second child on the waterbed above Stan. Stan said that her faith in God and belief of escape helped her survive. Her greatest fear was of The Company, which Cameron reinforced daily. To avoid painful punishment, Stan tried to comply with his commandments, which later led to her being allowed to go out to jog, work in the yard and care for the family's children in the mobile home. Even with an open door, neighbours and a telephone, she made no attempt to escape, as according to Stan, her fear of The Company kept her from seeking help. Additionally, Stan was allowed to visit her family by herself in 1981, but did not reveal her situation because of her fear and the possible consequences. Her family thought she was involved in a cult because of her homemade clothes, lack of money and absence of communications over the years. They didn't want to pressure her, fearing she'd go away forever. The next day, Stan returned with Hooker as her boyfriend. At the trial, Stan explained that she was happy due to visiting her family, who were therefore able to take a photograph of the pair happily smiling together. According to Stan, Hooker feared he had given his slave too much freedom and took her back into his mobile home, where he locked her in the wooden box under his waterbed. She remained in the box 23 hours a day for the next 3 years. Bodily functions were dealt with by using a bedpan which she hooked under herself with her feet. It was stated in court that Hooker's children were told Kay would go home at night. However, after they'd gone to bed, they took her out of the box to feed and torture her. She was reportedly not allowed to make any noise and had to lie still 23 hours long at a time in the dark with little air to breathe. In the summer conditions, it was especially harsh on her, as the temperatures would swell up to over 100 degrees in her box. To feed herself, she ate cold scraps of food. It was not until 1983 that Stan was reintroduced to the children and neighbours, with her being also allowed to get a job as a maid at a hotel. Hooker wanted Stan to become his second wife, which was a turning point for Janice. Janice confessed that, starting with their first date, she had also been tortured, brainwashed, and referred to as a whore over the years by Cameron. Janice further stated that she survived their relationship with denial and compartmentalization. By August 1984, Janice began struggling with herself and also went to Stan in order to inform her that Hooker was not part of the company. However, she did maintain that the organization did exist. In a televised interview for Girl in the Box, Stan told the interviewer that she then went to a bus station and called Hooker to inform him that she was leaving him, and that he reacted by bursting into tears. Stan subsequently caught a bus home. In the months that followed, she did not contact the police but continued to call Hooker regularly. She explained this at the trial by saying she wanted to give Hooker, at Janice's request, a chance to reform. 3 months later, Janice reported her husband to the police. She informed Lieutenant Jerry D. Brown of the Red Bluff Police that Cameron had kidnapped, tortured, and murdered Marie Elizabeth Spanhake, who had disappeared in 1976. Authorities were unable to locate the remains of the woman. Due to lack of physical proof, no murder charge was brought. Chris Hatcher, a forensic psychologist and criminal profiler, tested for Cameron's prosecution at the start of the 1985 trial, and Janice testified against her husband in exchange for full immunity. In the end, her husband was sentenced to consecutive terms for sexual assaults, kidnapping, and for using a knife in the process, for a total of 104 years imprisonment. Originally not eligible for parole until 2023, he had his hearing date moved up 7 years to 2015 by California's elderly parole program. On April 16, 2015, Hooker's request for parole was denied, with him being eligible for another hearing in 2022. Once back home, Stan studied for an accounting degree, married, and has a daughter. She also joined an organisation to help abused women. Both she and Janice have changed their last names and continue to live in California with no communication. Very harrowing stuff. Now we'll just brush over Michael J. Devlin. This is a hairy one. On January 12, 2007, Devlin was taken into custody and charged with the abduction of 4 days earlier of a 13-year-old Ben Ownby, whom police found that day. At the time of his discovery, law enforcement officials found another missing boy, Sean Hornbeck. He disappeared on October 6, 2002 at the age of 11 while riding his bike to a friend's house in Richwoods, Missouri. No one had heard from him until he was discovered in Devlin's apartment. The 2 boys were discovered after police noticed Devlin's white pickup truck, which matched the description of a vehicle in the vicinity of the 2002 abduction, in the parking lot of his apartment complex. They happened to be there to serve an unrelated arrest warrant. Hornbeck lived with Devlin, who presented the boy as his son. He was separated from his family for a total of 4 years, 3 months and 6 days, during which time the Sean Hornbeck Foundation and Search and Rescue Team were established. Both boys were reunited with their families after the discovery. Soon after Devlin's arrest, prosecutors and investigators from Washington, Franklin, St. Louis, and Lincoln counties, along with the FBI, the Missouri State Highway Patrol, and Kirkwood and St. Charles Police, formed a task force to investigate Devlin's possible involvement with other unsolved cases. Devlin, who had no criminal record at the time, was charged with 1 count of kidnapping in Franklin County, Missouri, as well as 1 count of kidnapping and armed criminal action in Washington County. On January 18, 2007, Devlin pleaded not guilty via closed-circuit television on the charges of child kidnapping. Prosecutors in the case said Devlin had already confessed. He was held at the Franklin County Sheriff's Department on a $1 million cash-only bail. He also had a $3 million bond in Washington County. In a January 2007 interview with the New York Post, Devlin was quoted saying, "I don't know how I'm going to explain myself to my parents." During the same interview, he claimed to have been happy while Hornbeck lived with him, and lonely prior to that, since most of his friends had gotten married and disappeared. On February 5th, On February 5th, St. Louis County Prosecutor Robert McCulloch added 71 new felony charges to the existing charges previously filed by Washington and Franklin County prosecutors. The first 18 counts, 1 of kidnapping and 17 counts of forcible sodomy, pertain to the 2007 abduction. The remaining 53 charges are kidnapping and forcible sodomy charges related back to the 2002 abduction of Hornbeck. Each of these individual accounts was a felony and carried the possibility of life in prison. On February 28th, a felony indictment in Franklin County charged Devlin with 1 account of child kidnapping and 1 account of armed criminal action for allegedly using a deadly weapon in kidnapping Ownby. This grand jury indictment replaced the previous Franklin County kidnapping charge against Devlin and added the weapon charge. On March 1st, Devlin was charged in federal court with 4 counts of producing child pornography and with 2 counts of transporting a minor across state lines to engage in sexual activity in Illinois. According to prosecutors, all 6 counts relate to the kidnapping of Hornbeck. On April 16th, Washington County Prosecutor John Rupp filed additional charges against Devlin, which accused him of attempted murder, kidnapping, armed criminal action, 3 counts of forcible sodomy, and 1 count of attempted forcible sodomy. On October 6th, prosecutors announced that Devlin would plead guilty to all charges against him in all 4 jurisdictions. So on the morning of October 9th, Devlin pleaded guilty to charges against him in Washington County. During that court appearance, he was sentenced to 3 life sentences for kidnapping and other crimes against Sean Hornbeck. The sentences were to begin after he had served life sentence imposing on October 8th for kidnapping Ben Ownby. This brings Devlin's total sentence of incarceration for 1,850 years. Not bad for somebody who didn't have a criminal record before he was caught. Jesus. And last, but not least, we'll have a look at Mary McElroy. 25-year-old Mary McElroy was kidnapped while taking a bubble bath in her father's home on the evening of May 27, 1933. Her abductors were brothers George and Walter McGee, Clarence Click, and Clarence Stevens. Walter McGee, a divorced ex-con from Oregon, was the gang leader. McGee and Stevens donned masks, forced their way into the house with a sawed-off shotgun, and allowed McElroy time to dry herself and get dressed. She apparently did not take them very seriously. When told that $60,000 was going to be demanded in exchange for her release, she joked, "I'm worth more than that." McElroy was taken to a farmhouse in Shawnee, Kansas, owned by Click, where she was chained to a wall in the basement. After demanding the original sum of $60,000, the kidnappers settled for $30,000, which Judge McElroy paid on May 19th. Mary McElroy was released unharmed near the Milbourne golf course after 29 hours in captivity. George McGee and Clarence Click were apprehended sometime before June 21st. Walter McGee was arrested in Amarillo, Texas on June 2nd after attempting to purchase a car with some of the ransom money. Of the original sum, about $9,000 was recovered from McGee's person. About $16,000 of the original ransom was recovered. The kidnapping and subsequent trial were a media sensation. The trial took place in Jefferson City. According to reports, McElroy evinced crippling shame and embarrassment when questioned. She related that Walter McGee had ordered her to strip naked before releasing her so that they could be sure she was not smuggling evidence. She refused and they did not force her. She also displayed difficulty in identifying her abductors in court when called to do so. She insisted she had been treated well and had even been given flowers by Walter before her release. During the trial, McElroy met with relatives of her kidnappers and publicly expressed sympathy for them. Suffering a nervous breakdown on February 10th, she disappeared from her father's home, surfacing a day later in Illinois after sending her father a telegram from Springfield which read, "I'm sorry, but I'm so frightened. I don't know what I'm doing." She was found in Normal and brought back to Missouri, where she explained her irrational departure to the authorities. "I felt like a murderer. I wanted to get away. I couldn't stand sitting still." Because he had masterminded the kidnapping, Walter McGee was given the harshest sentence. On March 30th, 1935, his sentence, death by hanging, was announced. Had it occurred, McGee would have been the first person to be executed for kidnapping in the United States. After an execution date was set for May 10th, Mary McElroy shocked everyone by contesting the penalty. In April 1935, she wrote to Governor Guy Brassfield Park, "Walter McGee's sentence has hung as heavily over me as it has him. Although punishing a guilty man, his victim will be made to suffer equally. In pleading for Walter McGee's life, I am pleading for my own peace of mind." McGee was granted a stay of execution by Park on May 7th. McElroy's father publicly backed her plea for his stay of execution. His sentence was eventually commuted to life in prison. The abduction and subsequent fallout proved to be extremely traumatic for Mary McElroy, and she suffered several nervous collapses in her years after the case. She remained on good terms with the McGee brothers, visiting them in prison and bringing them gifts. She never married and is known to have been addicted to opium. She lived with her father, Judge McElroy, for the most of her adult life. His death in 1939 devastated her and she became increasingly reclusive. On January 21st, 1940, her maid discovered McElroy's body in her bedroom. She had committed suicide, shooting herself in the head with a small pistol. She left a suicide note which read, "My 4 kidnappers are probably the 4 people on earth who don't consider me an utter fool. You have your death penalty now, so please give them a chance. Mary." McElroy was 32. At the time of her death, Walter and George McGee, 34 and 29 respectively, were still in prison. Clarence Click had been released in 1938, and Clarence Stevens was still at large. So, let me know what you think. I want your thoughts and ideas on Stockholm Syndrome, whether it is real, how scary that is. Leave the comments below and we'll have a discussion. Be sure to follow the Snuff Club Network on Twitter at @snuff_club and check out our primary show, which is the Meatballs Video Podcast, for a more light-hearted, fun-filled time. I've been your host, Bam Barrow. This has been Dying is Easy.